Chicago, 2011. A cop is murdered. Police and prosecutors swear they have the trigger man. He swears he didn't do it. How far will each side go to prove they're right?
Like it's just one bombshell after another, where you're like, what?
The story of a PlayStation, a brain-eating amoeba, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Off Duty, out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellas wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome to the Psych Legal Pop Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss popular culture through the lens of an attorney and a therapist. My name is Brooke Brigham, and I'm an attorney.
And I'm Tess Brigham. I'm the therapist.
This week, we're going to be talking about the Netflix documentary Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street. About
I feel like I just took a finance class.
I do too. I'm ready for my final. Okay. I have 15 pages.
I think I have twice that many. I've done outside research.
Yeah.
It has been a project.
I learned a lot about the financial industry, how all this stuff works. But anyway, this is the story of Bernie Madoff, who basically ran a Ponzi scheme.
64 billion when he got caught.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
On paper. He had basically stolen $65 billion from his investors. And so it's hard to know where to start here. I mean, I guess we can start with just a little bit of history about Bernie. One of the things I think that really motivated him is that his father was a real failure in business and had several businesses, and they all kind of went under. This was like after the Depression and World War II, and
he was a son of Jewish immigrants, and he grew up in Queens in a very stable middle class 1950s average kid public school.
Yeah. But, his father did have financial problems, and his mother ended up having to go to work, which back in those days was, very shameful. She went to work because she needed to go to work because the family needed money. So Bernie always kind of grew up in this shadow of, wanting to be successful.
Yes.
And then he married his wife, Ruth, and she came from money.
Yeah, she was considered a catch for him because he was never handsome. Like he was never, I guess apparently people said he was awkward. He was not, he wasn't this great looker. And she was very beautiful from this very prominent family.
Yeah.
Money.
And Bernie, he went to law school for a year or so. He dropped out and he ended up, so his father-in-law, Ruth's father, had was he an insurance broker?
No, I feel like he was, or I thought he was an accountant.
Or an accountant, that's right.
Yeah.
So he let Bernie kind of set up a little office in his office.
Yes.
And he started this investment company, and he traded over-the-counter stocks. And, this is back in the day where you do it by telephone, and it takes 3 weeks for the actual transaction to clear. And, he wasn't on the New York Stock Exchange, but these were stocks that were, kind of small, not really reputable companies outside of the stock exchange.
Yeah, but someone, and I can't remember their names, said that some of them were disreputable.
Yeah.
Right. I kind of feel like if you look at the bigger picture, I feel like somewhere around here was already kind of cutting corners, already sort of not thinking through and thinking, oh, this is not a legit company. I shouldn't be profiting from it. I should be, let me start working with them.
It was very risky.
Yes.
But it paid off because he was willing to take the risk, had, nothing to lose, I guess. And he ended up becoming very successful at it.
Yeah. Well, but it was during this time, right, that he decided to start an investment advisory business.
Right.
And his father-in-law started referring him, because he's an accountant, that's a good referral, him business. And I guess Saul is the father-in-law, right? And that Bernie had put all the clients' money into one account, and then he would distribute that money. And apparently, first off, this is what my understanding, and this is the part of the stuff that I'm get confused about. Like, once you become an investment advisor, you need to register as an investor. So he never registered.
Right. This is the beginning of his pattern.
Yes.
Where he has one legitimate business and one not legitimate business.
And and the other part about being an investment advisor is you're not supposed to put all your clients' money together.
Right.
And then distribute it out. You work.
It's individual.
This is what's good for this person. This is what they need. They're going to retire soon. This person wants to buy a house, all of that. But he, and apparently with the SEC, you can't have over 20 accounts combined, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, basically the SEC has a lot of rules, and it's meant to protect the consumer.
But it didn't.
But
we'll get to that later.
But he just ignored that.
Yeah.
He flat out ignored it. He basically advised, he called it an advisory business. He charged a fee. But like you said, he just pooled all the money together. And then I think what he did is he would just take the profits and give it back to his father-in-law, and then his father-in-law would dole out that was very
weird too. And then something happens that I feel like this was the moment in time where it all was born. That in May of 1962, the stock market drops. Bernie lost everyone's money. And a legitimate investment advisor would just come clean and say, hey, these are the stocks I put them in. That's how it is. I'm sorry, this dropped. But he didn't come clean. He borrowed money from his father-in-law. He paid everybody, made it look like everybody else is losing money, but except for Bernie's clients, they're making money.
Made him look like a genius.
And he paid everyone back with that. I think it was something like $30,000. So I feel like that was the moment in time where he sort of crossed a huge line, because in that moment in time, he could have said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on my legitimate business. This is all too risky and too weird. I'm not good at this, or I need to accept the losses or whatever it is. And one person said that he could either be a liar or a failure, and he chose to be a liar.
Yeah.
And I think that is so huge that for him, it was better to be a successful lying, stealing son of a bitch and steal people's money than to tell people I failed or I didn't. And really, when you really think about it, I have a whole other thing about failure, but when you really think about it, he didn't fail. The stock market dropped.
Right.
You can't control that.
Yeah, it's funny because he was trying to circumvent and control a system that is inherently risky.
Yes.
And that's the whole point, is that the stock, if you legitimately invest in the stock market, you're taking a risk. The market predictably goes up and down, has cycles. If you're in it for any long period of time, you're going to lose money.
Yeah.
But then you gain it back. And so, but he just rewrote the rules, basically.
And then we get into the 70s, and he's got these two businesses going. In the 70s, there was a lot of inflation. He hires his brother Peter, and they started using computers, which was very cutting edge at that time. Because, once upon a time, you picked up the phone, called someone, said, buy me 1,000 shares of, AT&T, and then, click the phone, and then it would take weeks and weeks for you to get anything back. So this made him very cutting edge. And then he started to become, and this was a market maker. And a market maker is a middleman. I am telling you, I've never been good with this kind of stuff. Yeah. So this was all very ooh.
Yeah, so it's like you warehouse stock, you buy a bunch of stock, and you sort of create your own market. And then you tell people, oh, well, I own this stock if you want to buy it. And again, these are for more risky things. And I think what happened was, so the NASDAQ, which is a different, is a different, I don't know what you want to call it, different thing than the New York Stock Exchange, was sort of seen as like a lesser than
The NASDAQ.
market. Yeah, the NASDAQ. But the revolution of computers is it kind of legitimized the NASDAQ because it made the NASDAQ more competitive. And so the stocks that were on the NASDAQ became more attractive. And I think those were the stocks that Bernie had been warehousing.
Yeah.
Again, this is my rudimentary understanding of it.
Well, but the thing is that, and this is, I wrote this down. I was like, okay, so your legitimate brokerage firm is doing really well. And yet you still have to run this shady side business of investing. Do you know what I mean? There's just, it's just really interesting to me that sometimes people do things that are a little edgy, a little shady because they feel desperate because they feel these things, but you're starting to make money. You're doing well. You could have just walked
But I think what he was trying to avoid was, again, if you are invested in the stock market, there's a chance that you're going to lose. You could lose everything. And I don't think he had this personality where he really wanted to be revered and respected by people. He couldn't stand disappointing people. I don't think he could handle telling people, God, I'm sorry, but you lost money.
Yeah.
So he was trying to fix it. It was like he was trying to control this, make this perfect world where no one would ever lose money. And everyone would always think, oh my gosh, you're brilliant and thank you. And
Well, yeah, and that makes complete sense because we learn later on that he is a control freak. I think he has OCD. That's just my 2 cents. But that he is a huge control freak, which is a very common thing for narcissists. And I'm sorry, this guy checks a lot of these boxes.
Yeah.
So
his father-in-law then retires. And so these two guys, Frank Avellino and
Michael Bennis.
Something Bennis.
Bennis?
Yeah.
It's not Bennis like Elaine Bennis, but
Right.
it's slightly off of that.
They came in and because I think they had worked with his father-in-law and they saw what was happening with Bernie, and they began to collect money from all kinds of investors and sent all the money to Bernie to invest through his, quote unquote,
And I guess
advisory.
Yeah. And so this is his first feeder fund. And we'll hear a lot about these feeder funds.
Right.
But also really quick, prior to Saul retiring, then, Bernie starts raising money from friends and family. So he knows what he's doing, but he starts collecting money from the people in his life, which I think is very significant.
Yeah. And this is when he starts to get, he starts to get rich.
Yeah.
And he moves his family, has 2 sons now. They moved to Long Island and, they're buying nice houses and boats and this and that. And,
these new accountants that are part of this feeder fund, they also don't register as an investment.
This is all being done with no SEC involvement.
And the thing was, this is where it started, which is these 2 accountants, they started taking clients' monies and invested it with a secret manager whose name could not be revealed without, that basically these 2 accountants were going to people saying, I have this magic man who can, give you great returns, but you can't know who he is and it's all a secret and don't tell anyone. And that right there is a little bit of a red flag.
Right.
Because, and I know a lot of people that work and invest, who are investment brokers and all that. And they're constantly, anyone who has your own business, you're constantly like, this is what I do. You want referrals, essentially.
You're constantly hustling.
Yes, but it was very odd. So it's very odd.
Yeah. So then we get into the 1980s. And at this point, Bernie has made his way onto the board of directors of NASDAQ.
Which is insane.
Yeah, he's starting to become this big, respected player in the financial world. And the financial world is blowing up. It's the dawn of globalization.
Oh, the 80s were a decadent time.
Yes.
The Reagan 80s were a time of, lots of cocaine, lots of partying.
Everyone wanted to be in on the stock market.
And the movie Wall Street came out, so it made it seem very, well, you saw the good and the bad of it. But yeah.
But yeah, this is when he, and like you were saying with this kind of like... control thing. This is when he moves into this lipstick building, an iconic skyscraper in Manhattan. And everyone said that like everything inside the office had to be perfect. Everything had to be black and gray, but it was a very tense atmosphere. And Bernie could be a real bully. It was like walking on eggshells. So this is in the office of his, you know, quote unquote legitimate business.
This is the 19th
floor of the lipstick building.
And he's a bully. And also he's a bully to Peter, his brother. And then his kids. I don't know when his kids started working for him. Because I want to say his kids are about our age.
Yeah, I think that comes later because like we're still in the 80s. They'd still be like in high school, college, probably. But there was the big market crash in 1987.
Black Monday.
But because Bernie was operating outside of the market, he looked like a hero because he kept his business functioning. He kept paying out, I don't know, I don't want to say dividends because that's a legitimate, you know, payout. But he kept paying, when people wanted their money out, he could give it to them. He was giving all these, you know, on paper, these gains. And and he's sitting on regulatory boards. I mean, it's crazy. It's like the fox in the hen house.
Yeah. So he was winning all this recognition. So he becomes a part of the SEC and he starts to write the rule book. Rule book for what? Yeah. He was elected to 3 terms as chairman of the board of the NASDAQ.
Yeah.
Which is insane. So, but he really fed on being the guy. He liked to be on the pedestal. He wanted all of that. And so when do they create the 17th floor? Maybe that's coming up.
So what happened? Well,
wait, there's so much material.
There's so much more. Okay, so then we get into the 90s, and this is the tech boom. So he's now doing 5 to 7% of all trades on the New York Stock Exchange. And that's what they call the market making. Don't really.
And this is part of his legitimate business.
Right. Okay. Well, because he wasn't really trading the illegitimate business, right. So the legitimate business, he is in the market, but he's still doing his secret investing advisory business, and he's giving people returns that are between 11 and 15%. And he never put anything in writing until somebody in their company decided to do a brochure touting 100% safe investments, which of course you can never say for a stock investment. So that's when the first time the SEC gets involved, and they're like, wait a minute. And, you know, they investigate this Avellino and Bienes, who were, you know, the guys, the accountants who were left over from his father-in-law. And they point the finger at Madoff. And so he gets a little bit spooked.
And then he panics, and then so the SEC so this is the part that was a little weird. So he panics. They go, the accountants, Bernie, and a lawyer go to the accountants with their lawyer go to the SEC. They rat out Bernie. Then he panics. The SEC starts to smell like this could be a Ponzi scheme. You know, you're not investing the money. So Madoff needed to show he made trades to give to the SEC. So he goes to his guy. So this whole time he's running this Ponzi scheme, just like, I'll give you my money. And then going, I'm going to do 10% this month and 12 this month.
But that kind of thing. Nothing is on paper to back it up. It's random. There's no.
So he goes to, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pronounce this last name, Frank Di Pasquale, to create the fake documents. And basically, he gave the SEC fake documents, and they were like, great, perfect.
Well, this is when they open the 17th floor. So they take it, the 17th floor of the lipstick building, they open this office, which is charged with basically night and day creating fake trading documents.
Yes.
And so they had to be historical. So they had to go back to the technology of the 80s and 70s. They had dot matrix printers and these old computers so that they could create statements that looked like they were made in the 80s. And they had to go back and look at the historical data of what stocks traded for what amount on what day. I mean, this is a tremendous amount of work. Because the weird thing is, I had to do this once for a case where I had to look up like old stock prices. You know, you can go on the internet and say, what was the price of a share of Disney stock on January 1st, 1982? And you can find it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. But anyway, so they did that. And they just had this factory where they were churning out these documents to show to the SEC to say, see, look, like these are all the trades that we made. And, you know, this is what we paid to people. And they tried to make it look legitimate. And apparently it satisfied the SEC. Yeah. And they closed the case. In a way.
But because of that, the accountants had to give up their business and they had to pay money back, which is $444 million, which Bernie doesn't have. So he goes to Jeffrey Pickauer. And so he has, and this Pickauer is also kind of a sleaze. So there's these big four clients, Pickauer, Carl Shapiro, Norman Levy, and there's one more, and I don't know why I didn't write it down, but there's one more. Do you have all four names?
I didn't write them down, but I know what you're talking about.
So these big old white men, and Bernie persuades them to help him out. Like, I need money, you know, because he couldn't close the biz and go legitimate. He needed $440 million because that's what the SEC said, according to his fake documents. Yeah,
they said that this is what you have. You need to return this to the investors. You need to close down this thing, and basically like we'll leave you alone. Okay. So yeah, he didn't have the money. That's when he went to these investors to get the money, and then he said that no one wanted their money back. Like, he tried to return this money to the investors, and they said, no, we like what you're doing. We're happy with what we're getting from you. And they wanted to keep the money with him. So Madoff said, okay. So while the SEC missed one of the biggest frauds in history, he went forward. Yeah. He continued.
Yeah. And again, that's why I just wrote this little thing, which is he could have closed this business. He could have been out. He could have been done. SEC wouldn't have never poked around again unless someone poked around that long. He could have walked away and just had this other business. But I think that it's back to that idea of success and not letting people down. I'd rather be a liar than seem like a failure to these people.
I think he was also emboldened by the fact that the SEC came and investigated him, and he got away with it. And so forever after that, he would say, well, the SEC investigated me and they found I didn't do it. They didn't find any fraud. They didn't. They went on record saying they found no fraud, because they thought he had the money. Yeah. Because he got the money from his investor friends. Yeah. So that just was like a license to carry on.
Yeah. Well, and I think Pickauer, I think starts to put together what's going on, and this will come back later. But then we meet one of these investors. They also interview investors. So all of his investors are these really wealthy men, they're regular people like any of us. And we meet Gordon Bennett, and he sold his business. He created this business, built it. He sold it for $1 million, and he invested $100,000 with those two accountants. And he was getting 9% returns. And he said it was good and it was steady. And he said, I did a lot of due diligence. I looked at this stuff. I saw the SEC gave him a clean bill of health.
Right.
So the SEC is very much to be blamed for this. Very
absolutely.
They are just as culpable. And, he asked around, like he did all of the things that he needed to do. And so then he invested the other $900,000. So all of his money was in with him, and we learn more about their story as we go.
And so then we were also introduced to some other characters. So the people that Bernie had working on the 17th floor were kind of unsavory.
Yes.
You had this Frank DiPascali, who was right out of, a mob movie. There was a woman, Annette Biangiorno, working class woman from Queens. She handled the big clients for like 30 years. Jerry and George were the computer guys who were churning out all of these statements. So, I think, in the end, they tried to claim, well, we didn't know what was going on, but that's debatable. But anyway.
Yes. So, and that's the whole thing, right? Which is, the first episode ends here where they talk about, you've got these juxtaposed, this 17th floor, which no one can get access to except for the people that work there. And they interview this guy who was working there at night, I think just printing out documents.
Yeah, he said they do 700 a day.
Yeah, I mean, and he probably didn't know what was going on. He was just being paid really well to work there at night and just, oh, you just need me to sit by a thing and print? Okay, this sounds like a great job.
Yeah.
And yes, the 17th floor. This is where the scheme will go.
But meanwhile, on the 19th floor, things are looking good because he's got this reputation, and they had likened him to the soup Nazi.
Yes, I love that. I thought that was great.
Don't ask too many questions, or you're gonna get kicked out of the club. And he got a lot of Jewish customers because they trusted him.
Yes. And he was also, this is the other thing, he was very charitable.
Yeah.
His wife, Ruth, basically, while she had an office there, she very much, her job was, to raise money, do these fundraisers. A lot of them honored Bernie. And that was her part. So he was also this very generous person. And I think that also contributes to why people felt like they could trust him. And, but yeah, no one had access to the 17th floor. And the sons, I think, are working there by this time. And they think it's, they're asking questions. They think it's odd that he put, Frank's down there in charge versus the sons. And they have and anytime the sons or Peter tried to ask about what was going on, this is where the bully would come out and he would just shut them down.
Well, he was trying to protect them.
Yes.
He kept them away from the illegal stuff, and they had their suspicions and whatever, but in the end it didn't save Peter so much, but it did save the sons.
Well, we'll get to the end if we save that. But in 1994, he goes to Palm Beach, buys a big home, gets into the Palm Beach Country Club because they accept Jewish people in this country club. It's $300,000 a year to join. Thought that was interesting. And so Bernie's down there and he's making it very exclusive to join his investing firm. So this is the thing, because it was illegal in many ways, that helped him tremendously because he didn't want to advertise. He didn't want to do this. So people are thinking like, ooh, I'm getting something that other people aren't getting.
Yeah.
Something special, something different.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure what year we're in now, if it's like the late 80s.
We're in the mid 90s. We're in the mid 90s.
So this is when hedge funds come along. And so hedge funds are funds where you don't, you hedge your bets. You don't just bet on good things happening and the market going up. You also bet on bad things happening. Maybe the market will go down. So one way or another, you're going to win something.
I thought it was more about, or maybe I misunderstood this. So I thought that with the hedge funds, which I've never understood hedge funds, but I thought it was like that you are putting money into the stock, you're betting on things going up, which is, when most people want when you're investing in the stock market, but that you also take stakes in the market if prices go down, and that also you have a cap of like, once it hits this number, that's, I was thinking about it like you go to Vegas and you have $500 and maybe you're winning, and that there's also a cap at which people decide, right? Like, I'm not going to lose any more of this. Like, I'm going to play $500 in the stock market, and if, once I get, if it goes up, that's great, but I'm never going to go below the 500. I guess I misunderstood what hedge funds are.
Well, all I know is that, like, basically a hedge fund, you can basically bet on anything, whether it's good or bad. So you cover your bases. So because there's a chance that some good things are going to happen, some bad things are going to happen. Yeah. So it's not like the stock market where you're investing, hoping you only win if the market goes up. So in a hedge fund, you could actually end up making money if the market goes down, because you're betting the market's going to go down.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, again, it's pretty
very confusing,
complicated, which also makes it a lot easier to get people, to get people's money who don't understand it. And then you act like you understand it. So they're like, oh, okay, well, here, take my money. And
so in the 80s and 90s, Silicon Valley explodes. It becomes more popular. people are in Silicon Valley pooling their money together, investing with Bernie. And then we learn about split strike conversion, right? You ride the bull market, but you have, this is what I thought this was. Splits. So this is what this is. You ride the bull market, but you have a floor under your losses. Right?
Well, I have written down here that, so split strike strategy was something that Bernie made up, and he started to market it. And so there was something called 220, which was in the fee structure. In the industry, the fee structure, that they would take a 2% fee plus 20% of the profits. So this all was precipitated by these guys, Fairfield Greenwich. They formed this hedge fund, and they want Bernie to manage it. And so he says to them, he says, you know what? I'm not even going to charge you this 2% fee. I'm just going to take 20% commission on all the trades. And and of course, this is the fake. Yeah, this is the fake business. This is the illegal business. And he just started dealing with this hedge fund and the different hedge funds, and he just took this strategy that if you ask any questions, he'd just say, hit the road. I don't have time for this. And so people didn't ask questions. And so Fairfield Greenwich was his first big hedge fund customer. And this guy, Walter Noel, he was part of it. And he had 5 daughters who were all married to aristocrats around the
5 attractive daughters.
World. Yeah. And so Bernie started getting, so they started investing, and Bernie started getting his hands in money all over the world. And just, so he started getting connected, not just in New York, not just in his bubble he'd been in, but now he's going worldwide.
Yeah.
He's, and branches out even more.
Yeah. And this is where they start talking about pick hour and how he kind of knew what was going on. He was a lawyer and accountant. And so he started drawing a bunch of money out and knowing that this is all a scam. And then he basically was the one person that knew
what Bernie was doing,
what he was doing, and that he could exploit that, and that he went to Madoff and asked for his statement to show losses so he didn't have to pay taxes, which really just pissed me off.
So Madoff is helping him commit tax fraud.
Yes.
And he's helping Madoff keep this Ponzi scheme going.
Yes.
So they're in this, they're stuck with each other. And because when Madoff needs money to cover stuff, he goes to him, and he did this sort of veiled threat to say, I want $7 billion out, knowing Bernie didn't have $7 billion. And so,
which really irritates me to no end. It's like, you know what? I pay all my taxes. I'm not trying to get away with anything. I hate these really wealthy people that just want to, how do you think we're going to pay for libraries and things? Anyway, so it's 2000 and the internet, we have the internet bust, the .com bubble burst, and then we're introduced to Erin, is it Arviland? She's the author of Too Good to Be True, and basically what she wrote for Barron's in 2000, and she's
a reporter for Barron's magazine,
and she got a tip because basically it was saying here's Madoff, and Madoff was not affected by the .com bubble, and she finds out that he never loses, which is impossible. So she went to the exchange and asked traders about Madoff. No one had done any trades with him. So here he has these $1 billion investing, and he says he's doing all these trades, and she cannot find one single person who had done a trade with him. And she went to him and asked to be interviewed, and he didn't want to be interviewed. And that was very odd because it's a big honor for some Barron's magazine, to be in Barron's magazine, to have this feature being written about you. And the article spooked Jeffrey Tucker, who I cannot.
Is he one of the ones from? He's one of the ones from Fairfield Greenwich, or?
Yeah, I think so. He wanted to talk to Madoff. Oh, okay, that's right. So this was the one from I think he was Fairfield Greenwich. And so what happened now is, he was like, I'm worried about everything. What's going on? And so Frank and Bernie had figured out a way to, and I don't know how they did this. They created it so that they could go on a computer and say to him,
let's pull up this trade.
Yeah, any of these trades.
Give me a company, name a date. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were able to. They had enlisted their 2 computer guys, George Perez and Jerry O'Hara. So they created this system where they could just perpetuate the fraud by being able to show customers, oh, yeah, no, this is real. Look, I'll pull this up right now.
And it worked.
Yeah.
Fooled them.
And so it placated this guy and he went away. So that was like the end of episode 2.
Yeah.
So we're halfway through this.
Well, we're at episode 3 and we go back to the Bennett and talking about how he wasn't greedy, had Madoff investigated, it was okay. So then we go back to 1999 and we learn about a place called Rampart in Boston. And there's a sales guy named Frank Casey. And he thought that Madoff was a little fishy. He thought it was very weird that he had 11% on average positive returns. And he really wanted to know why. And also the company that Rampart wanted to figure out, what is he doing?
How can we replicate this?
How do we replicate this if this guy's doing so well? And so that's where he was sent on this.
He was sent on a fact-finding mission. He went to New York and he met up with this guy, Villachet.
Is it Theory? Theory?
First,
I thought it was Theory.
his last name is Villachet.
Okay.
I can't. He's got like 4 names.
Yes.
And anyway, his last name is Villachet.
He's a wealthy investor for rich people in Europe, basically.
Right. He's a wealthy investor, has lots of friends, got all his friends in Europe, to invest with
old money. People's names on names on set. We're talking about like the Windsors,
Yeah. Got them to invest with Bernie. And so, he meets with him and he says, well, at first, Villachet was not disclosing who he was investing with. He had redacted the name of the firm. And so when Villachet leaves the room,
oh, that's right.
This guy, Frank, he kind of takes a peek inside the file and he peeks and he sees the name of the, Bernie Madoff Investments or whatever. And so again, Madoff is not charging a fee. He's just taking the commissions. And so Frank Casey goes back to Boston and he goes to this guy. This guy is the hero of the whole
I love
story.
This guy. He's my favorite.
Harry Markopoulos. And he's this derivatives guy at this firm. He's the nerd. He's the math nerd. And, he said, Frank says, well, can you look at this? Can you replicate this method? And he's like, no, like this is totally inconsistent with how the stock market works. He runs all these numbers. He, looks at everything and he's like, this is a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, he is. And apparently he is able to say that within like an hour?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a Ponzi scheme. And this is when he, March 1st, 2000, writes his first letter to the SEC. Mm-hmm. This is his first letter. So mind you, this whole thing ended in 2008. So anyone who, for 8 years, anyway.
And and I don't know I think it was in the very last letter he wrote to them, he gives this manifesto of like red flags, all these points. I mean, he could not have made it any more clear to the SEC and gave them information, details. Nobody even called him.
Yeah. Well, and no one called him. He went to several times and they rebuffed him. He wrote to them. He tried to get a hold of them. They wouldn't. And then he went to the papers and said, hey, I got a scoop for you. And they said they didn't want to go against Madoff. Everyone was saying, you need a smoking gun. You need something big. But again, everyone's very afraid of Madoff. So many people are making so much money from him that they don't want to rock the boat. And so it just so happens that we're back to Frank Casey is traveling in Europe. He happens to share a cab with an investigative financial journalist who writes about hedge funds, basically. Mm-hmm. And the article comes out and again, saying a lot of the same things that are being said. And a senior, this is my favorite part too, a senior enforcement officer calls Bernie and asks him, hey, I want to talk to you about your hedge fund. And Bernie goes, I don't have a hedge fund. And she's like, oh, I didn't think you did. Okay, bye. Click. Just basically taking him at his word. And yes.
Oh, he was so entrenched with the SEC that the SEC would call him up on the phone and say, are you doing anything wrong? No. Okay, bye. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Well, I do want to talk about, because the minute that, I don't know if anyone's read this book. It's so good. Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. Have you ever read that?
I haven't read it, but
it's really, really good. And basically it's an exploration of how little we know about the people around us that we don't know, and what happens when we get to know people. And it's about how we misjudge and misunderstand strangers sometimes. And we do this with terrible consequences. We think that we can read people a lot better than we can. And so, we are incapable of spotting deception, right? And so this is what Gladwell talks about in the book that I think is so interesting, is that human nature, we default to the truth, and we have to default to the truth. Like, imagine what our world is.
It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah. Imagine what our world would be like if you're at Starbucks and they said that's $5. You'd be like, really? How do you prove that to me? You're at this weird thing where we do have to, for the most part, most of the time, trust people, because our world would be chaos. And yes, some people are better at spotting deception, but assuming that the truth is important for society to function. And what was so special about Harry Markopolis was that his brain works very differently. He doesn't assume that everyone is telling the truth all the time. And, the book really gets into Harry's background. He grew up, his parents had a bunch of businesses that failed. He saw that people, screw stuff up and make mistakes. And then he becomes this forensic accountant, and his brain is trained to look for those gaps. And I think this is very interesting. You might have a different perception of this. I work with attorneys, and I've always found that attorneys have had the hardest time in therapy, because a lot of, dealing with anxiety and dealing with things is really trust. You have to trust that things are going to go, things are going to be work out, that you're going to be okay. And a lot of attorneys, their brains are trained to be skeptical about everything, to look for the holes and be like, well, look it over here, look it over there. And I just found over the years that it's harder for someone who has that kind of brain to turn it off, or if you've been trained in that way, to turn it off and to say, okay, I have to trust, I'm not saying that.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, it's definitely, very cynical, skeptical. That's how you're trained. You're educated and trained in law school to think that way.
Yeah.
And it's hard to not let it bleed into your everyday life, although somehow there's certain areas of my life where it never bled into.
Yes.
But that's another story.
Well, very quickly. So there's another book that I love called Rethink by Adam Grant. And basically the book is about questioning ourselves, about rethinking, the powers of rethinking something. So you're questioning yourselves and so when we question ourselves, we make the world unpredictable. And it requires us to admit that the facts have changed, and that was once right, now may be wrong. And that's very hard for people.
That's like that sunk cost theory.
The sunk cost fallacy. Yeah. And so reconsidering something we believe can threaten our identities, make us feel like we're losing ourselves. People laugh at someone who uses Windows 95, but there are many of us who are clinging on to opinions that we formed in 1995. And I bring all of this up because I think that I don't think that Madoff thought to himself, oh, this is how new human nature is, and this is how this is. I think he was just, sort of figuring out, what do I need to be like and do to make this scheme work? But I think that because human nature is that we have to trust and believe people, and that so many of these people, I've been to Bernie's home, I've been this, I've been that. If I question Bernie, then that means that I have to question so much about my life. And people don't sell that.
My own judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, Bernie was just doing what Bernie needed to do to make himself feel good.
Yes.
He like I said, I think he really had this intense desire to be adored and, trusted, ironically. Yeah, and have people admire him and look up to him, especially his family, the people that were close to him.
All right.
But anyway, let's pivot to, 9/11.
9/11 happens, yes. So the best thing that could have ever happened for Bernie.
Well, it's sort of the beginning of the end for Bernie, in a way. But
how so? Because
well,
I thought that he was right.
At that point, at that point. So when 9/11 happened, all anybody cared about was like the economy, getting the markets back running, getting things stabilized. So of course, the deregulation kicked in. Let's make it easier for these financial markets to function, get back to normal. All the money, the budget for investigating any kind of financial fraud went into, anti-terrorism, wars, that followed after that. So, the SEC wasn't even really doing much to begin with. Now they're really doing absolutely nothing. And so this is when his sons, I think, became more involved in the business, but he still kept them separate from everything.
Well, and they're asking questions like, what happens if you die?
Right.
What happens if you die suddenly? And I think it was his secretary that was also, his secretary was being interviewed. I think the secretary who worked for him for a long time was also saying things like, hey, what happens if this happens? Like if
we lost all of our records? What if no one knows what's going on?
And if Bernie did die and the boys don't know what's going on, then they would have to, of course, in the secretary's mind, she has no idea what's going down on the 17th floor, but she's being smart and she's asking these questions and saying the boys would have to start all over again. So why would you want to do that?
Yeah. So the legitimate business became insolvent somewhere between 1998 and 2002. So that's why I was saying, in this time when 9/11 happens, 2001, he's already in trouble. So he had to funnel millions of dollars from the illegal 17th floor to the 19th floor between 2002 and 2008 when he was finally caught, under the guise of investments to make the legitimate business look better. So he was making it look like all this money is being invested in the legitimate business.
Yeah. So if, for example, if he didn't have the illegitimate business, the illegal business, he would have been in, he'd be out of business.
Yeah. And so, but he's also spending like crazy during this time. He's quote unquote loaning all this money to his sons that he knows is never going to be paid back. And then I don't know how this exactly came to pass, but our friend Harry Markopoulos, he meets with Villachet in Paris. And how did that happen? I don't know. Well, I guess he does have that connection. So with the Rampart, is that what it's?
Yeah, Rampart.
Rampart. Yeah. So I think he went over there to try to solicit some get business from these European clients. And Villachet says, "Oh, my European clients aren't interested because, of course, the Rampart has risk. It's a legitimate business, and they were with Madoff, and Madoff had no risk, and so they were just going to stay with him."
Yeah. So, and then also he learned that Bernie was handling money through the Cayman Islands. And the Cayman, as we all know, is, a place where shady money goes to be laundered. And that apparently Madoff was, now accepting money from criminals, but of course he is one too. So what does he care?
Right.
And Harry starts to get really worried because he's the only one that is shouting this from the rooftops. And if cartels are investing in Bernie and getting a great return, or their money's being, handled and laundered, they don't want anyone messing with that for sure. So he's like carrying a gun. He's looking for car bombs. And it was during this trip that Villachet explains that all of his money's there, and, it can't be a scheme. And if it is a scheme, I'm a dead man. I thought that was that goes back to this thing of, you get someone who's sophisticated and worldly and understands these things, and he puts everything into Madoff, all into one pot. So it can't
It's so hard to believe. I know.
Yeah.
That was the thing. It was so hard for me to believe that all of these very sophisticated people with everything at their fingertips, they could, so weird.
So we get back, they talk a little bit about, right, how much Bernie would bully Peter, made fun of him, and this is very upsetting to me. Peter goes to therapy, which I think is a great thing. And Bernie makes fun of him. Like, why do you have to go to therapy?
In front of everybody.
In front of everybody, which is really rude. And it just pisses me off. And then the secretary, she explains this is who he is. And this is a problem in our workplace, is that people see, again, this is 2000, but I mean, that's wrong, right? No one should be made fun of at work. No one should be made fun of going to therapy. And then the secretary is basically just excusing the behavior. That irritated
Well,
me.
this is Wall Street.
I know. I got to let it go.
These are the big boys.
Okay, so let's move on to 2000. I feel like next time 2005.
Well, yeah. Well, 2000. So there were a lot of complaints to the SEC. I don't know if they were all from Harry or who they were from. Anyway, the SEC gets complaints about Madoff. They assign 2 junior examiners, straight out of school.
Which I think is very interesting.
Yes,
why they do that.
Right. To conduct an exam of Madoff's business. And so usually when they come in and they do these exams, they meet with the compliance officer, but they don't meet with the boss. Mm-hmm. No, Madoff comes in and he's going to supervise this. And, he goes through the motions with them. They don't know what they're doing. He denies that he's running a hedge fund. He says, he's like, I dealt with this with your boss years ago. We settled this years ago.
Well, yeah, he keeps pivoting, right? So when they go into things, when they start focusing on things that are legitimate, he's friendly and nice.
Right.
And when they start to get closer to the illegitimate, I keep saying illegitimate, the illegal business, the Ponzi scheme, he gets mad. And that's why I think it's so interesting that they brought in these 2 junior people. It's like, what are you doing? If this guy is the master of Wall Street and people are complaining about him, why do you send 2 junior people?
They weren't taking it seriously.
Yeah, I think they knew they had to do something. And that, of course, exactly what happened is what you think happened, is that he intimidated them, he sweet-talked them, he did this, he did that, and they dropped it. They wrote a report and said, nothing there. And now, yet again, the SEC has given him the green light. Yeah. So now he's even more emboldened.
Well, not for long, though, because to cut to August 2005, he's down to $13 million. I
mean, only $13
million. But he has calls in, meaning, people wanting their money out, for $120 million.
Yeah.
So he's underwater now in the Ponzi scheme. And I think the legitimate business is completely pretty much out of business. So he calls up Jeff Pickauer. Pickauer gives him the $120 million. He also gets some money from this woman, Sonia Cohn, who's a financier from Vienna or something. I don't know how she got hooked up with her.
She brings a lot of cash.
Yeah. So together with, Pickauer's money, her money, he's kind of flush again. And, he's still going. He's getting money wherever he can.
Yeah. But this is the beginning of this growth, like 2006 till 2007.
Well, this is right before this is the bubble burst. So this is the bubble forming here. And Harry Markopoulos has not given up.
It's like a dog with a bone. Good for him. Thank God for him.
Yeah. He's telling the SEC this is mathematically impossible to get these returns. There's no counterparties for the trades, meaning they can't find a person on the other side who actually traded with him. There's all these red flags. He sends his red flag letter to the SEC.
With 30 red flags.
Yeah. Detailed.
Yes.
Like detailed.
Handing up on
this is why these are red flags. And he said he actually started knocking on the doors of some of his clients, like trying to get information. So then in about 2006, Madoff...
Oh, wait, hold on, though. Before that, though, what happens is that Madoff gets spooked again, and he has a conversation with the SEC that says, I'm going to come in, and I'm going to come in, and I ask me anything.
It was like he thought he could go in and talk his way out of it. Well, and he did. He did.
Yeah. So he answers all their questions. He lies right through his teeth. And he gives them, and of course, this is the big poker play, right? Which is he gives them his account number. False information that was quote unquote his account, which if you went in there, it should show 60 whatever billion or 7 billion, wherever we're at this point. He gives it to them on a Friday afternoon, walks out the door, spending the weekend thinking I could get busted at any moment. And then Monday comes, Tuesday comes, Wednesday comes, nothing, because the SEC didn't even bother to check.
Right. Well, and also the only thing that they did, they obviously never checked, but they did tell him that he had to register as an advisor with the SEC to market himself to future clients. Big whoop. Yeah. And was this the account that was at JP Morgan Chase? Or is that a different account?
Yeah. Well, they talk about that towards the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so between 2006 and 2008, billions, because he was, the Ponzi scheme for a long time was operating in the 2 to 3, 5 billion, under 10 billion.
Yeah.
And then it just started to grow and grow. And so, and he's starting to live large. And he again battled the SEC and won. So it emboldens people even more, like, oh, he's really not doing him wrong. If the SEC had shut him down, had actually taken 5 minutes to look up this account and do their jobs, billions of dollars would have been saved.
Yeah.
Billions.
So now we're up to 2008.
And such a dark time in our history.
This is the financial crisis. The housing market crashes. The financial crisis. Now all of a sudden, everyone wants their money back. All of the world.
Yeah, people panic.
And just prior to this, again, he always does this right before something bad happens. He went on a spending spree in 2007, doubled people's salaries. He's spending like crazy. Anyway, so when the market crash happens, he goes to all of his old friends, Fairfield Greenwich, Sonia Cohen. Nobody will give him any money. And he says, because interspersed in this documentary are interviews with Madoff himself from prison when he gave a deposition in the civil
plaintiff
case for these people to get their money back, get a fund for the victims. And he says that basically at that point, he knew that it was over. He was down to $300 million.
Only 300 million.
He tried to give his sons these huge bonus checks to basically offload this money because he knows and they, Mark and Andrew were incredibly ethical.
Yeah.
Considering like what they'd been raised in, but he did try to shield them from this stuff, but they were like trying to talk him out of it. Like, what are you doing? He comes clean to his family. And the sons are just distraught. And this really, they were lucky that this happened. So Mark's father-in-law is a lawyer, and Mark and Andrew go to see him immediately. And his father-in-law tells him this is a continuing crime. You must report him to the FBI now, or you will be an accessory. And they do.
Yeah.
They smartly do. They call the FBI. They tell them everything that they know. The FBI goes to his house to arrest him. And he basically, before he even calls his lawyer, he just confesses to the FBI, confesses everything.
Yeah. Well, one thing they mentioned in this is that apparently when they ask Ruth, and Ruth says, what's a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah.
And so that's always been a question. How much did Ruth know or not know?
And they said that she was the bookkeeper and that when the FBI went in, she had an office, I think, on the 19th floor. They looked in her office, looked in her desk, and they said it looked like a bookie's desk or like there was evidence that she knew.
Yeah.
I think she was just saying that in front of her kids to try to look innocent.
Yeah. Well, and what's very interesting about this is that also, right, we're at this point in our history, because this is the end of 2008. This is, I think he's arrested he comes clean like December 10th. And all of this stuff was going on. There was this recession, and he becomes sort of the poster child of this is what's to blame for our, everything. And then Villachet commits suicide 11 days after Bernie turns himself in, because he said it earlier. I'm a dead man. Like I can't. And he.
Well, he just
foreshadowing.
the guilt. Yeah, because he had lost all this money, not just his money, his friends' money.
Everything.
He told all his friends to invest with Madoff.
So because he pled guilty, it took a lot of the heat off of the feeder funds, the banks, no criminal liability, and there should have been a lot more people prosecuted in the end.
Well, and Frank, well, when the FBI, they first discover the 19th floor, then they discover the 17th floor, and Frank De Pascali basically knows it's over. He becomes a cooperating witness. He gives them all the information, gives them a roadmap of how the whole scheme worked, told them everything, cooperated. And then one of the ironic things was, he still had some money left, I guess, because he got out on bail, which people were pissed off about.
Bernie.
Yeah. And then, it came out that, the victims of this were, not just these very rich people and not just the, not rich people in Florida who were trying to retire, but I mean, celebrities like Steven Spielberg, Elie Wiesel.
Yeah.
I remember Kevin Bacon and his wife lost everything.
Kira Sedgwick.
They lost everything.
Yeah. A lot of people. And there were a lot of people invested with him that lost everything. And yeah.
And so he pled guilty in court March 12th, 2009. And he refused to implicate anyone, even though it would have been impossible for him to do this alone, obviously. The 17th floor employees said they didn't really know about the Ponzi scheme, but they knew that the trades never occurred. So they had some culpability.
Yeah. And then they talk about the JP Morgan. So this is the other part, is his account was with JP Morgan. So this is a huge entity that had his account, and they had a view of Bernie's scheme because they knew the amount of money that was in his account.
And they were profiting
from this.
Yeah.
And so the fact that no one at JP Morgan, basically they had to pay $2 billion in fines, but no one was charged. But the reality is, and I think that what I learned from this is these big banks, JP Morgan, and
they just pay the fines.
They just pay the fines. And you know what the thing is? They do this crappy stuff and they probably made billions off of this scheme. And they're like, oh, slap your hands. Bye. And what's $2 billion to JP Morgan?
Nothing.
Ugh. It's just, and so that's the thing, right? They're saying, how can you transfer billions of dollars back and forth to all these accounts and not generate what they call a SARS report, right? Because, if you ever deposit a check over $10,000, God, they're holding on to it for a week. I'm like, who do you think I am?
Yeah, and they're required if there's anything suspicious.
Yeah,
over 10,000,
do something
to file this paperwork. No, it's a joke.
And then we learn about how awful this was for the victims, which is basically there's the SIPC, which is an insurance fund for brokers. And basically, I think all of these entities and brokers, they all pay dues into this so that if someone does something wrong, just like what happened with Madoff, that they could get the insurance out. But then basically they were only asking like for $150 in annual dues from not just one person, from
per bank
or something, like $150. That's like a lunch for them. Well, so what happened was there wasn't any money. And so the SIPC said, okay, well, this wouldn't really apply to a Ponzi scheme. Basically they didn't have the money. And instead of saying we don't have the money, we mismanaged this the whole time.
They said this isn't covered.
This isn't covered. Typical insurance.
Right.
And then we learn about the clawback.
Well, yeah. So what happened was they appointed a trustee to try to recover as much money as possible.
Picard. It's very close to pick hours.
Yeah. So like we were saying before, the losses on paper were $64 billion, but the amount of money in actual cash invested was $19 billion. And remarkably, they recovered 17 out of $19 billion because they were so aggressive. This trustee, this Pickard guy, Irving Pickard, he aggressively went after anybody who got paid more than they invested.
Yes. This is the clawback.
Clawback.
Yeah.
So there were all these clawback lawsuits for people who took out more than they paid in. And, some of these people were very rich.
So the problem with the clawbacks was that even though people were the people who made the most profits and who gained money from investing with Bernie were the early investors. And so what was happening was that this Pickard was going to people saying, 30 years ago, your grandfather made, $10 million from his time with Bernie. We want that back. And it's a little bit of like, that's something my grandfather did.
And a lot of it wasn't even $10 million. It was maybe they had made a couple $100,000, and that money they used to send their kids to college, to pay off their home or to buy a retirement home or to retire on or whatever. And it's like, that money's gone.
Yeah. The money's gone. And then they're trying to claw this money from it. And the thing about Pickard is that his law firm made billions from this case.
Yeah.
So even the people maybe who aren't, if they go back to the Bennetts, right, and they talk about their story, which is essentially they made money from Madoff. He was always making money from Madoff. And then they go back and try to claw back money from him. And he's like, but I've spent all my money and I'm living, I think, looks like they live kind of a simple life where he had this business and he sold it. And now they have to pay all this money back that they thought was theirs. It's almost kind of like getting a tax bill or something like that. But of course, Pickard and his law firm made billions from clawing back all this money. So yet again, someone else is making money off the backs of these people yet again. And that just bothered me.
Yeah. So Bernie's friend, Jeffrey Pickauer, who was always bailing him out, he probably would have ended up being indicted as a co-conspirator because he was. But he wound up dead in the bottom of his swimming pool.
Yes, in Palm Beach.
Yes, which they, I think the consensus was he had a heart attack. So who knows?
Yeah, very suspicious.
Very suspicious.
So, and then June 29th, my birthday, 2009 was his sentencing, and and there was a lot of fear around, would he just get another slap on the wrist? But he was given 150 years. He wanted to go home, and the judge was like, oh, no, you're not going home.
Yeah.
You get your stuff together. Bye. You're off.
Took him into custody. And apparently he wanted to apologize to his victims.
Oh, yes.
So he turned around and just sort of looked at the people in the courtroom and gave this half-assed apology, but he showed no remorse, no emotion. It was just like going through the motions. So people were upset about that. And then his brother got 10 years.
Which I thought seemed pretty harsh, because I got the sense, I think Peter was their quote unquote compliance officer, but I think that Bernie really let him out to dry, because Bernie never told him the full truth. And I think Peter had a sense that something was up, something was wrong. I don't think he knew the extent of it, but I felt for Peter, because I felt like he probably felt so trapped in there, like working for his brother, maybe doing things that he didn't want to be doing.
Yeah, because I thought that he was keeping him separate from the 17th floor like he was doing with his sons.
But I think that there were times where Peter had to help him out with things, and I think Peter just sort of did it knowing that maybe this isn't completely legal. I don't know. I thought that's probably why he was going to therapy.
Yeah, and then Frank De Pascali, he actually died of lung cancer before he was able to be sentenced. And then some of the other players on the 17th floor, Annette and Jody Krupe, they got 6 years, and the two computer guys got 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Wasn't too much.
And then the world really turned on the sons. And I think this is what is truly tragic about this entire story. Beyond, obviously so many people, he ruined so many people's lives. But he ruined, in the end, even though he was trying to protect his children, he didn't protect them. And everyone turned on the sons. Like the sons were hounded.
They were harassing them. Yeah.
They couldn't do anything. I'm sure they probably couldn't get a job anywhere. They've lost everything. And then what was also happening was that the sons, Ruth, who had been married to Bernie forever, Ruth was having a hard time letting him go. So I think Ruth was still going and visiting them. And the sons were like, listen, if you want to be in our lives and in your grandchildren's lives, he needs to be done.
Yeah.
Out of our lives.
For him.
And so I think that at the time, that all of this was going on, I think that the sons were estranged from Ruth, and Andy seemed to be able to move on. He's the younger of the two, but Mark got in such a dark, dark place. And he ends up at 46 years old committing suicide on the exact day. So 2 years after the day that he learned about his father's Ponzi scheme, he hangs himself in his apartment. And it's just tragic. And so this was another really interesting thing. I was listening to Kate Casey's podcast, Reality Life with Kate Casey, and she interviewed, I think, is it Diana?
The woman who wrote the book.
Yeah, The Wizard of Lies. And that one, that's the book that was the Robert De Niro, Michelle Pfeiffer movie that was made. She was talking to her and she was telling Kate about, she had visited Bernie 2 times in person for the book in prison. And she said, the first time he was, even though he's in these in this denim, heavy thing, that he was perfectly done, that his pants were creased, and like just, right, the appearances, even though I'm in prison for the rest of my life, I'm going to give appearances. And she said the second time she saw him was shortly after Mark had committed suicide, and he showed up and he was disheveled, and, buttons were not properly, something was out, his collar was out, he had cut himself from shaving. And it really hit her like, oh, he's, that he was really, really affected by Mark committing suicide.
So that's what it took.
Yeah. And
that's what it took for him to have some feelings about.
But what was interesting is she said that was the initial, because I think she saw him shortly after the suicide. I think that then what happened was that she talked to him a little bit later than that, and then he started making excuses and pointing the finger at other people. Mark committed suicide because of this. Mark committed suicide because of that. Blah, 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 blah. So he has, the way she said it was, right, we use sociopath and psychopath a lot, but there is a difference in that he's a sociopath, not a psychopath, which means there is some level of humanity inside of him in there if you tap into it, but he's not going to, and he might feel it, but he's not going to take accountability for it. So
and then to add tragedy on top of tragedy, his other son,
I didn't know this.
His other son, Andrew, he had cancer before this happened, and he had, beaten it, quote unquote. And it came back, and he ended up dying of lymphoma at 48 years old.
And that was 2014. So Mark dies in 2010. Andy passes away in 2014, and Ruth has been kicked out of all of her homes.
The FBI seized all their homes.
Everything.
She was literally homeless.
Yeah.
And living in her car.
Yeah, I didn't.
Wild.
Yeah, out of 2 suitcases in the back of her car, she lost
everything. She lost her jewelry, like any valuable possession. She just had her clothes.
Yeah,
and
that was it. And your quote unquote husband, I don't know, did they ever divorce? And they might still be married.
Probably. Well, Bernie died.
Yes.
At age 82.
In 2019, I thought. No, 2021.
He died
right.
April 2021.
Which is crazy.
82.
So listen, at least he spent from 70 to 82 in prison. And hopefully it wasn't comfortable. And hopefully he suffered in some way, shape, or form. I personally don't, and I guess it takes a sociopath or a big narcissist to do this. I would have such a pit in my stomach every single day if I was running this Ponzi scheme. I would be so worried about everything. And the fact that he got it rolling for as long as he did, it's pretty unreal. And I think that it's right, the combination of him and the lengths that he was willing to go and do, but also just the SEC, someone from the SEC needed to be right next to Bernie and JP Chase and a few others.
This is the concept that they kind of end it with, is that basically Madoff was the scapegoat of the financial crisis. He was the only person to go to jail, and his victims were the only ones who were not bailed out by the government. So nobody from the financial industry went to jail, no regulators, no CEOs, no heads of banks. All the banks were bailed out by the government. And, Yeah, and the Congress did. They showed a clip. Congress had these hearings.
Oh yes, Harry
where they
tore everyone in the U.S.
Yeah, so they investigated.
Congress, that was great.
They investigated the SEC. Harry came and testified, and some woman from the SEC tried to speak, and all the Congress people were like just tearing her down. But what became of that?
Nothing.
Like, do we have any more regulations in place today than we did before? I don't know. I mean, there was, once Obama was elected, he did some financial, the Dodd-Frank, kind of financial reform. I don't know what. No, it's not enough. It's never enough.
It's not enough. That's the problem. Until we start putting these men behind bars that clearly know what they're doing and clearly know what's happening and signing off on them, it's never going to change. Because like I said earlier, JP Morgan knew the entire time, never did anything about it because they were profiting. They were making so much money. And their big thing was, oh, okay, give me a couple dollars back. Okay, you're okay. And that's the part that really irritates me, is it just feels really unfair. And I know that's really stupid because life is not fair, but these kinds of things can just get under my skin because it just doesn't feel fair at all.
It's not, but this is, again, this is more about, crime and someone perpetrating a crime and how people become a victim of a crime. Because like I said, it's like, I can't get over how these people didn't know, they didn't question, how they just blindly followed this guy. I mean, they could have invested first of all, you're already rich.
Yes.
Okay? You're already rich. You could never invest a dime and you could live high off the hog like a prince for the rest of your life. You don't need this money. You're trying to make more money than you already have. And so it's a hard concept to grasp how these people got involved with him, how they would just completely trust him. I don't know. I'm happy. I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be cynical.
And I know for me, I think I need to be a little more cynical. I'm too trusting, and I need to be a little more cynical. I think I'm not controlling like that. So I trust people are doing what they say they're going to do. And, I've gotten burned, but I don't know. Personally, I'd rather live that kind of life than, the other.
Yeah. Well, there's a healthy balance.
Yes, there is. So, oh my God. I feel like we ran a marathon. That was watching it, doing all of that it was fascinating. I feel a lot smarter than I did before, but it was a lot to take in.
But it's important. It's important information. We need to know.
We have to. And something's got to change. All of that 1%, all those people that were protesting down at Wall Street, it's like, what came to any of that? Nothing. The 1% still the 1%, and they're just getting richer and richer and richer.
Yeah, well,
and not paying their taxes.
Yeah, income inequality is the worst it's ever been, and especially with COVID. Like, they're consolidating now. Like even just on a basic level. Like, I don't know if you follow Robert Reich. He's the former Secretary of Labor under Clinton.
I've seen the name. Yeah.
So he's a great source of information on social media, and he talks about, the economics of all of this. And even just on a basic level of grocery stores, that all these grocery stores have now consolidated. Like Albertsons bought Kroger, who also bought, like all these big names. So basically right now, there's a conglomerate of that owns most of the grocery stores in this country. Well, what do you think that's going to do to the price of food?
Yeah.
So on every level, these multi-billion-dollar corporations are getting together so they can charge higher prices. They are, people talk about inflation. We have inflation because these companies would rather give money to their stockholders than cut their prices. The gas prices, these we're talking, this isn't even billions, we're talking trillions. Multi-trillion-dollar companies will not cut the price of gas so that they can make a little bit less money for their shareholders.
Yeah.
A little bit less. They're still going to be rich AF. You know, just like these Madoff people, you're already rich. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah. But I think it's like anything else in life where, right, there was a time in my life where if I could make the amount of money that I make now, I would think that my whole life was made.
Right.
Right. And it just happens. You start buying more stuff.
You get used to it.
You get used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get used to it. You start buying things. You start upping your lifestyle.
Have to maintain it.
Yeah. And so you do want, okay, now I need more money. Now I need more money. But that's where it needs to be regulated. Like that one company can't own every single grocery store.
Yeah. What happened to the
But I think that's what Reagan did. Wasn't these all Reagan's, the deregulating?
Well,
that was him.
Clinton did quite a bit of deregulation.
We need more regulations.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We do. Anyway.
All right.
We'll get off our soapboxes and move on.
Anyway, it was very good, but I think our take was very thorough.
It was.
You could just listen to this.
Yeah. You could probably get college credit for this.
Yeah.
If you tried.
All right.
Anyway.
Bring us home, bro.
Okay. Thank you so much for listening, especially if you made it to the end of this. Yeah. We appreciate it.
Can I very quickly, I wrote a book. It's called True You, a step-by-step guide to conquering your quarter-life crisis. It's out now at Amazon. Sorry, that's where the books are.
It's not at your local independent bookstore?
No, because I did it myself. So it's just me.
Okay.
I have some books at my house, but anyway, it is for if you're 20, early 30s, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. It is also great if you have a 20-something. It's a great book for someone who's maybe launching and trying to figure things out. It's all about conquering this time of your life where you feel like you have so many choices and overwhelmed and don't know how to make decisions. So, True You by Tess Brigham. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So if you enjoyed our podcast, we would appreciate it if you would subscribe.
Yes.
And also leave a review, a 5-star review.
Very positive.
A positive review. And write a review if you can, because that really does help. We would really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellows wherever you get your podcasts.